Chapter 1. The Theft and the Ranger. Emma Rose Whitmore's hands trembled as she pressed her back against the rough bark of the old oak tree, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild bird trapped in a cage. Through the pre-dawn darkness, she watched the shadowy figures moving through her corral with practiced efficiency, their voices carrying on the still air in hushed, urgent whispers. "Easy now, you beauty," one of the thieves crooned to her prize stallion Thunder. The magnificent black Mustang snorted and pawed the ground, his eyes rolling white with fear and fury. "None of that now. You're coming with us." Emma bit down hard on her lower lip to keep from crying out as they slipped halters over the heads of her 5 breeding horses, the only animals of value left on the Whitmore ranch. These horses represented her final chance to pay off the crushing debt that threatened to swallow everything her father had built. Without them, she would lose the ranch within the month. The leader of the group, a wiry man with a distinctive limp, gestured toward the barn. "Check for more stock, but be quick about it. We need to be gone before first light." Emma's breath caught. She recognized that voice. Jake Blackwood, the most wanted outlaw in 3 counties. His gang had been terrorizing small ranchers for months, but the local sheriff seemed powerless to stop them. Or perhaps, Emma thought bitterly, Sheriff Hawkins simply didn't care enough to pursue justice for folks who couldn't line his pocket. As the thieves led her horses toward the main road, Emma crept closer, desperate to see which direction they would take. A twig snapped beneath her boot and she froze, her pulse roaring in her ears. What was that? The youngest of the gang members, barely more than a boy, swung around with his gun drawn. "Just a coyote," Blackwood said dismissively. "Quit jumping at shadows, Billy. We got what we came for." Emma watched helplessly as her future disappeared into the darkness, the soft thunder of hoofbeats fading until only silence remained. She sank to her knees in the dirt, pressing her fists against her eyes as hot tears threatened to spill over. Everything was gone. Everything. But as the first pale fingers of dawn crept across the horizon, something hard and determined crystallized in her chest. She might be a woman alone in a man's world, but she was Thomas Whitmore's daughter, and Whitmores didn't surrender without a fight. By the time the sun cleared the eastern hills, Emma had saddled her mare Ginger and was riding hard toward Cedar Creek. The town sprawled along the creek bed like a collection of children's blocks, its weathered buildings and dusty streets holding little promise of justice. But Emma had nowhere else to turn. She tied Ginger to the hitching post outside Murphy's saloon and pushed through the batwing doors, her riding boots clicking against the sawdust-covered floor. The interior was dim and smoky, filled with the scent of whiskey and unwashed bodies. Several men, hunched over their morning drinks, looked up at her entrance with bleary curiosity. "I need to speak with Sheriff Hawkins," Emma announced, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet room. Murphy, the barrel-chested saloon keeper, wiped his hands on his stained apron. "Sheriff ain't here, Miss Emma. Haven't seen him since yesterday afternoon." "Then where is he?" Emma's patience, already worn thin by the morning's events, began to fray around the edges. "Probably sleeping off a bottle at Rosie's place," called out Tom Bradley, a local rancher who'd lost his own stock to rustlers the month before. "That's where he spends most of his time these days." Emma's cheeks burned with frustration and embarrassment. She should have known better than to expect help from Hawkins. The man was more interested in collecting bribes than enforcing the law. "The Blackwood gang hit my place last night," she said, raising her voice so everyone in the saloon could hear. "They took my breeding stock, every last horse. If anyone has information about where they might have headed, I'll pay whatever I can afford." An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. These men knew what those horses meant to her, knew that losing them would spell the end of the Whitmore ranch, but they also knew the dangers of crossing Jake Blackwood. "Miss Emma," Murphy said gently, "you need to let this go. Blackwood's gang ain't the sort of men you want to tangle with. Maybe it's time you considered Malcolm Hendricks' offer for your land." Emma's spine stiffened. Malcolm Hendricks had been circling her property like a vulture ever since her father's death, making increasingly aggressive offers to buy her out. The thought of surrendering to that pompous cattle baron made her stomach turn. I'll see my ranch burned to the ground before I sell it to Hendricks, she said, her green eyes flashing with defiance. That can be arranged. The voice came from the shadows near the back of the room, low and gravelly, with an edge that made every man in the saloon tense. Emma turned to see a tall figure rise from a corner table, his movements fluid and controlled despite his obvious fatigue. The stranger stepped into the weak light filtering through the dirty windows, and Emma's breath caught. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against a faded blue shirt. Dark hair fell across his forehead in unruly waves, and his steel-gray eyes held a weariness that spoke of too many hard miles and harder choices. A silver star gleamed on his leather vest. "Texas Ranger," someone whispered, and the saloon fell silent as a tomb. Emma found her voice first. "Are you here about the Blackwood gang?" The ranger's gaze swept over her, taking in her practical riding clothes and the determined set of her jaw. "I am. Name's Captain Jed Stone." His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "And you are?" "Emma Whitmore. They hit my ranch this morning, took my horses." She stepped closer, hope flaring in her chest for the first time since dawn. "You're going after them?" Stone's expression remained carefully neutral. "That's ranger business, Miss Whitmore. I suggest you go home and let the law handle this." "The law?" Emma's voice rose with incredulous anger. "The law in this town couldn't catch a 3-legged dog, let alone Jake Blackwood. Those horses are all I have left, Captain Stone. Without them, I lose everything." "I'm sorry for your loss," Stone said, his tone suggesting the conversation was over. "But tracking dangerous outlaws is no work for a woman." The dismissal hit Emma like a physical blow. She'd expected it, of course. Men always assumed women were too delicate for the harsh realities of frontier life. But coming from a Texas Ranger, a man who was supposed to represent justice, it stung worse than usual. "No work for a woman?" she repeated, her voice deadly quiet. "Let me tell you something, Captain Stone. I've been tracking animals across this countryside since I was 12 years old. I know every creek, every canyon, every game trail within 50 miles of here. I can read sign that would make your eyes water, and I can shoot well enough to put food on the table. But most importantly, I know the Blackwood gang's habits because I've been watching them for months, waiting for Sheriff Hawkins to do something about them." Stone's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've been watching them. They hit the Morrison place 2 months ago, the Bradley Ranch last month, and the Schmidt Farm 3 weeks back. Each time, they've taken the stock north toward the hill country. There's a pattern, if you know how to look for it." The ranger studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. Around them, the saloon patrons held their breath, sensing the tension crackling between the two strong-willed individuals. "Even if that's true," Stone said finally, "I can't take a civilian into danger. It's against regulations." Emma's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Your regulations won't get my horses back. But I know where they're headed, and I know shortcuts through terrain that would take you days to navigate alone. You need me, Captain Stone, whether you want to admit it or not." "The lady's got a point," Tom Bradley spoke up reluctantly. "Emma knows this country better than anyone. Her daddy used to say she could track a ghost across solid rock." Stone's jaw tightened. "This isn't a Sunday ride, gentlemen. The Blackwood gang has killed 3 men in the past 2 months. They won't hesitate to put a bullet in anyone who gets in their way." "Then we'd better make sure we get them before they get us," Emma said, meeting his steely gaze without flinching. "I'm going after my horses with or without your help, Captain, but I'd rather have a Texas Ranger watching my back than face them alone." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken challenges. Emma could see the conflict in Stone's eyes, duty warring with pragmatism, authority clashing with necessity. She held her breath, knowing that her entire future hung on his next words. Finally, Stone sighed and rubbed his forehead with one hand. "Against my better judgment," he muttered. "But if you're coming with me, you follow my orders without question. At the first sign of trouble, you do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you. Is that understood?" Emma's heart leaped with triumph, but she kept her expression carefully composed. "Understood." And if you slow me down or put yourself in unnecessary danger, I'll tie you to the nearest tree and leave you there while I finish this alone. That won't be necessary." Stone studied her for another moment, then nodded curtly. "We leave in an hour. Bring whatever supplies you need for 3 days on the trail. And Miss Whitmore?" His voice carried a warning that made her pulse quicken. "Don't make me regret this decision." As Emma turned to leave the saloon, she caught sight of Malcolm Hendricks entering through the back door. The cattle baron's pale eyes fixed on her with calculating interest, and his thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. Something cold slithered down Emma's spine, but she lifted her chin and walked past him without acknowledgement. Outside, the morning sun felt warm on her face, and for the first time since watching her horses disappear into the darkness, Emma allowed herself to hope. She had an ally now, a reluctant one, perhaps, but a Texas Ranger nonetheless. The Blackwood gang might think they'd won, but they'd reckoned without Emma Whitmore's determination and Captain Jedstone's skill. As she untied Ginger from the hitching post, Emma caught a glimpse of Stone through the saloon window. He was studying a map spread across his table, his dark head bent in concentration. Something about his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead, made her pulse flutter unexpectedly. She shook her head, annoyed with herself. This was no time for such foolishness. She had a ranch to save and horses to recover. Whatever else happened between her and the enigmatic ranger would have to wait. But as she rode toward home to gather her supplies, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a turn she'd never expected. Captain Jed Stone was unlike any man she'd ever met, hard and dangerous, yet somehow compelling. Working with him to track the Blackwood gang would test every skill she possessed and challenge her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it sent a thrill of anticipation racing through her veins. Emma Whitmore had never backed down from a challenge in her life, and she wasn't about to start now. Chapter 2. The Trail. Emma pulled her hat down low against the blazing Texas sun as she knelt beside the churned earth where the stolen horses had passed. The tracks were clear as scripture to her practiced eye, 5 sets of hoofprints heading northwest, with the distinctive drag mark left by Thunder's right rear hoof where he'd favored an old injury. "They're moving fast," she said, rising to dust off her knees, "but not as fast as they could. They're being careful not to lame the horses." Captain Stone sat motionless atop his bay gelding, his steel-gray eyes scanning the horizon. "How long ago?" Emma studied the depth of the prints, the way the displaced dirt had settled. 4 hours, maybe 5. We're gaining on them." Stone's mouth tightened into a hard line. "Not fast enough. They've got too much of a head start." "Then maybe you should have listened to me from the beginning, instead of wasting an hour arguing about whether I could keep up," Emma said tartly, swinging up onto Ginger's back with fluid grace. The ranger's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. They'd been riding hard for 3 hours, and Emma had proven herself at every turn. She'd found water where he would have seen only dry creek beds, identified shortcuts through terrain that would have cost them precious time, and read the outlaw's trail with an expertise that grudgingly impressed him. What frustrated Stone most was how wrong he'd been about her. Emma Whitmore wasn't some pampered rancher's daughter playing at being tough. She rode like she'd been born in the saddle, never complained about the punishing pace, and possessed an intimate knowledge of the countryside that came from years of hard-won experience. The woman was also distractingly beautiful, though she seemed completely unaware of it. Tendrils of auburn hair had escaped her braid to curl around her face, and her green eyes sparkled with determination and intelligence. Even covered in trail dust, she looked like something out of a man's dreams. Stone cursed silently and forced his attention back to the matter at hand. He had no business noticing how the sun brought out golden highlights in her hair, or how her lips curved when she was concentrating on reading signs. This was a job, nothing more. "The trail splits here," Emma called out, reining in beside a rocky outcropping. 3 horses went north toward Devil's Canyon, 2 headed west. Stone studied the ground, confirming her assessment. "They're trying to confuse any pursuit." Standard outlaw tactics. Which way do we follow? West? The 2 horses that way include your stallion. I can see his distinctive print. Blackwood's too smart to split up his most valuable stock. Emma's eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been respect. You can read Thunder's track? I've been tracking men and animals for 15 years, Miss Whitmore. I may not know this country like you do, but I know how to follow a trail. A flush of embarrassment colored her cheeks. I didn't mean to imply. Forget it. Stone wheeled his horse toward the western trail. Let's move. They rode in silence for the next hour, following the clear trail across rolling grassland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. The sun climbed higher, turning the air shimmering and thick. Emma's shirt clung to her back with perspiration, but she never slowed or complained. It was Emma who spotted the lone rider first. There, she said quietly, pointing toward a distant ridge. Someone's watching us. Stone pulled out his spyglass and studied the figure silhouetted against the sky. Young man, maybe 17 or 18, could be a gang scout. What do? We take him alive. He might know where Blackwood's holed up. Stone collapsed the spyglass and turned to Emma. Can you get closer without being seen? Emma studied the terrain between them and the ridge, her mind automatically calculating angles and cover. There's a dry wash that runs along the base of that hill. I could circle around through it, come up behind him. Too dangerous. I'll do it. You're too big, Emma said bluntly. That wash is barely 4 feet deep in most places. You'd be spotted before you got halfway there, but I could make it. Stone's expression darkened. Absolutely not. I'm not sending a woman into danger while I sit here safe. This isn't about being a woman, Emma said, her voice sharp with frustration. It's about using the right person for the job. I'm smaller, I know how to move quietly, and I understand horse behavior. If that scout bolts, I'll have a better chance of turning his mount than you would. The logic was sound, and Stone knew it. But every instinct he possessed rebelled against the idea of putting Emma at risk. She was a civilian, for God's sake, and a woman besides. If something happened to her... I can do this, Captain, Emma said, more gently, reading the conflict in his face. Trust me. Trust. Such a simple word, yet it carried the weight of the world. Stone had learned long ago that trusting the wrong person could get you killed. But as he looked into Emma's steady green eyes, he found himself nodding against his better judgment. Stay low, move slow, and if anything goes wrong, you get out of there fast. Understood? Understood. Emma dismounted and handed him Ginger's reins, then began working her way toward the wash with movements so fluid and natural she seemed to flow across the landscape like water. Stone watched through his spyglass, his heart hammering with anxiety he had no right to feel. The scout, for Stone, was now certain. That's what he was doing. Sat motionless on his horse, attention fixed on the main trail. He never looked down at the wash where Emma crept closer with infinite patience. Stone found himself holding his breath as she reached the base of the ridge and began the careful climb upward. When Emma finally emerged from a cluster of boulders not 10 feet behind the unsuspecting scout, Stone felt a surge of admiration. The woman moved like smoke, silent and nearly invisible until she chose to reveal herself. Don't move, Emma said quietly, her Colt steady in her hands. Keep your hands where I can see them. The young man jerked in surprise, his horse shying nervously. For a moment, Stone thought the boy might try to run. Then Emma made a soft clicking sound with her tongue, and the horse's ears pricked forward with interest instead of alarm. Easy, boy, she murmured, keeping her gun trained on the rider while somehow projecting calm authority that the horse recognized and responded to. Nobody wants to hurt you, just settle down now. The horse stopped dancing and stood quietly, as if mesmerized by Emma's voice. The scout, seeing his avenue of escape cut off by his own mount's cooperation, slowly raised his hands. Stone spurred his bay up the ridge, leading Ginger behind him. By the time he reached them, Emma had the young outlaw disarmed and looking thoroughly demoralized. Name's Billy Santos, the boy said in response to Stone's terse questions. I ain't been with the gang long, I swear. This was only my second job. Where's Blackwood headed? Stone demanded. Billy's frightened eyes darted between the imposing ranger and the woman who'd captured him so effortlessly. I don't know, honest. Jake don't tell us nothing except what we need to know. Emma stepped closer, her expression gentling. Billy, isn't it? You look like you could use a good meal and a safe place to sleep. How old are you, son? 17, Billy mumbled, suddenly looking even younger. 17. Emma's voice carried infinite compassion. What happened to your family? The boy's face crumpled. Pa died in the war. Ma took sick last winter, and there wasn't nobody left. Jake said I could ride with them, make some money. Stone watched Emma work with growing amazement. Where his harsh interrogation had produced only fear and defiance, her gentle approach was drawing out information the boy probably didn't even realize he was giving. Jake's not your friend, Billy, Emma said softly. Men like him use boys like you and throw them away when they become inconvenient. You don't have to follow that path. What else am I gonna do? Billy's voice cracked with desperation. I got no trade, no family, nothing. You're good with horses, Emma observed. I saw how you handled your mount. That's a skill that's always in demand on a ranch. Hope flickered in the boy's eyes before dying away. Who'd hire a known outlaw? Someone who believes in second chances, Emma said firmly. But first you need to help us stop Jake before he hurts more innocent people. Where is he taking those horses? Billy was quiet for a long moment, internal struggle written across his young face. Finally, he sighed in defeat. There's a box canyon about 20 miles north of here. Got water and grass. Wall's too steep to climb. Jake uses it when he needs to lay low with stolen stock. Stone felt a surge of satisfaction. How many men does he have with him? 4, counting me. But I was supposed to watch for pursuit and meet them at Willow Creek tonight if the trail was clear. Then that's where we'll be waiting, Stone said coldly. Billy's face went white. You can't. Jake'll know I told you. He'll kill me for sure. No, he won't, Emma said with quiet conviction, because you're not going back to him. You're coming with us. Stone stared at her. Emma, we can't what? Leave a 17-year-old boy to face a killer's wrath? I won't do it, Captain. I won't have his blood on my hands. The set of her jaw told Stone that arguing would be futile. Besides, she was right. Sending the boy back to Blackwood would be tantamount to murder. He'll slow us down, Stone said finally. No, I won't, Billy said eagerly. I can help. I know all of Jake's habits, his favorite camping spots, everything. Emma smiled at the boy with genuine warmth. See, we've gained an ally. Stone wasn't convinced, but he found himself nodding. Something about Emma's faith in people made him want to believe the best was possible, even when experience suggested otherwise. They made good time toward Willow Creek, with Billy proving surprisingly helpful. The boy seemed to blossom under Emma's kindness and Stone's grudging acceptance, providing details about the gang's routines that would prove invaluable. It was late afternoon when they reached the creek crossing, and Stone immediately saw the problem. Recent rains had swollen the normally placid stream into a rushing torrent of muddy water and debris. We'll have to find another way across, Stone said, studying the churning current. There isn't time, Emma replied, dismounting to study the water more closely. Billy said Jake expects him by nightfall. If he doesn't show, they'll know something's wrong and move the horses. The water's too dangerous. One wrong step and you could be swept away. Emma turned to face him, her chin set at that stubborn angle he was beginning to recognize. I can make it. Ginger's a strong swimmer and I know how to handle river crossings. Absolutely not. Captain Stone? I said no and I mean it. Stone's voice carried the full weight of his authority. I've seen too many good people die in flash floods. We'll find another way. For a moment, Emma looked ready to argue. Then her expression softened as she seemed to see something in his face that gave her pause. Wait, she said quietly, what do you suggest? Stone studied the creek, looking for alternatives. The water was indeed treacherous, but they had no choice. Every minute they delayed gave Blackwood more time to escape with Emma's horses. We go together, he said finally. Billy and I will take the horses across one at a time. You wait here until... No. Emma's voice was firm. If we're crossing, we all cross together. I won't be left behind like excess baggage, Stone wanted to argue, but the determined light in her eyes told him it would be useless. Besides, she was right about one thing. They needed to move fast. Stay close to me, he ordered. If you get in trouble, grab my stirrup and hold on. Emma nodded, then turned to Billy. Can you swim? The boy nodded nervously. Some. Good. Follow Captain Stone's lead and don't panic if your horse stumbles. They're stronger swimmers than you might think. Stone took the lead, guiding his bay into the swirling water. The current immediately grabbed at the horse's legs, trying to sweep them downstream. Behind him, he could hear Emma encouraging Ginger in that same calm voice she'd used with Billy's mount. They were halfway across when disaster struck. Billy's horse, spooked by a floating branch, reared and lost its footing. The boy cried out as his mount went down, throwing him into the rushing water. Without hesitation, Stone spurred his bay toward the struggling pair. But Emma was faster, driving Ginger directly into the current where Billy flailed helplessly. Take my hand, she shouted, leaning precariously from her saddle. Billy lunged toward her, desperation giving him strength. Emma caught his wrist just as the current would have swept him away, her face contorting with effort as she fought to hold on. Stone reached them seconds later, grabbing Billy's other arm. Together, they hauled the boy up behind Stone's saddle, where he clung with shaking hands. His horse, Emma called out, pointing downstream where Billy's mount struggled against the current. Stone wanted to let the animal go. They had more pressing concerns. But Emma was already turning Ginger downstream, her face set with determination. She caught up with the panicked horse and somehow managed to grab its trailing reins, talking to it in that magical voice until it calmed enough to follow her guidance. By the time they reached the far bank, all of them were soaked and exhausted. Billy collapsed on the muddy ground, retching up creek water, while his horse stood with trembling legs and heaving sides. That was the bravest damn fool thing I've ever seen, Stone said as Emma dismounted on unsteady legs. Which part? She asked with a shaky laugh. All of it. Stone stepped closer, his hands hovering near her shoulders as if he wanted to touch her but didn't dare. You could have been killed. So could Billy. Emma's green eyes met his steadily. Sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks. Stone stared down at her, seeing her truly for the first time. Mud streaked her face, her hair hung in wet tangles, and her clothes were plastered to her body. But her eyes blazed with fierce compassion and unwavering courage that took his breath away. This wasn't just a beautiful woman or even a skilled tracker. This was someone special, someone worth protecting, someone worth... Stone yanked his thoughts back from that dangerous precipice. He had no business thinking such things about Emma Whitmore. She deserved better than a broken-down ranger with too much blood on his hands and too many ghosts in his past. But as they prepared to continue toward their confrontation with the Blackwood gang, Stone found himself watching Emma with new eyes. She'd risked her life for a boy she barely knew, shown mercy to an enemy, and faced danger without flinching. Whatever happened in the hours ahead, Stone knew one thing for certain. Emma Whitmore was unlike any woman he'd ever met, and keeping her safe had become more important to him than his own life. Chapter 3. Under the Stars. The small fire crackled softly in the gathering dusk, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the three travelers. Billy had fallen asleep against his saddle, exhausted from the day's events and the terror of nearly drowning. His young face looked peaceful in the firelight, free from the haunted expression that had marked him as one of Jake Blackwood's gang. Emma sat across from Captain Stone, her knees drawn up to her chest as she stared into the flames. They'd made camp in a sheltered grove of cottonwoods beside a small spring, the perfect spot to rest the horses and wait for morning. Tomorrow they would intercept Blackwood at Willow Creek, but tonight felt suspended in time, as if the world beyond their small circle of light didn't exist. You did well today, Stone said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the soft sounds of the horses grazing nearby. With the boy, I mean. I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that. Emma glanced up, surprised by the admission. Billy's not a hardened criminal. He's just a scared kid who made bad choices because he saw no other options. Most lawmen would have seen him as nothing more than an outlaw. Most lawmen aren't women. Emma's lips curved in a small smile. We tend to look at the person behind the action. Stone studied her face in the firelight, noting the way her auburn hair caught the golden glow and how her green eyes seemed to hold depths he'd never noticed before. What made you that way? Most people become harder after losing everything, not softer. The question hung between them, more personal than anything they'd shared. Emma was quiet for so long that Stone thought she might not answer. Then she sighed and wrapped her arms around her knees. "My father," she said finally. "Thomas Whitmore was the strongest man I've ever known, but he never confused strength with cruelty. He taught me that true courage isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can care and still keep fighting." "He sounds like a good man." "He was." Emma's voice grew soft with memory. "After my mother died when I was 10, he could have sent me away to live with relatives in the city. Instead, he kept me with him, taught me everything he knew about horses and ranching. He said I was his partner, not just his daughter." Stone felt something twist in his chest at the love evident in her voice. "How did you lose him?" "Pneumonia. 3 years ago. It took him so fast." Emma's voice trailed off, and she stared into the fire for a long moment. "I kept expecting him to walk through the door, complaining about some problem with the horses or worrying about the weather. Even now, sometimes I forget he's gone." "I'm sorry." The simple words carried more weight than flowery condolences ever could. Emma looked up to find Stone watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Understanding, perhaps? Or recognition of shared pain? "What about you?" she asked. "What made you become a ranger?" Stone's jaw tightened, and Emma thought he might deflect the question, but after a moment he began to speak, his voice low and carefully controlled. "I had a ranch once. Nothing fancy, just a small spread north of Austin. I was going to raise cattle, maybe horses. I was even engaged to a woman named Sarah." He paused, his hands clenching into fists. 5 years ago, Comanche raiders hit while I was in town buying supplies. When I got back..." Emma's heart clenched at the anguish in his voice. "Oh, Jed." The use of his given name seemed to surprise them both. Stone looked up sharply, and Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks at the intimacy of it. "I found them in the yard," he continued, his voice hollow. "My parents, my younger sister Sarah, they'd fought hard, but there were too many raiders. I buried them all on the hill overlooking the creek where Sarah and I used to walk." "I'm so sorry," Emma whispered. "After that, I sold what was left and joined the Rangers. Figured if I couldn't save my own family, maybe I could save someone else's." Turn's smile was bitter. "Turns out the world's full of people who need saving, but not all of them can be saved." Emma wanted to reach out to him, to offer comfort for wounds that were still raw after 5 years. But something in his posture warned her away. Instead, she asked, "Do you ever think about having that ranch again? A different ranch, I mean." Stone shook his head. "That life died with them. I'm a ranger now. It's all I know how to be." "But surely you want more than just chasing outlaws across Texas. Don't you want a home, a family? Men in my line of work don't get happy endings, Emma. We get bullets and unmarked graves." His voice was harsh, but Emma heard the pain beneath it. "I learned that lesson the hard way." The conversation lapsed into silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Emma watched Stone's profile in the firelight, seeing the lines of grief and weariness that marked his face. He was younger than she'd first thought, probably no more than 30. But he carried himself like a man who'd seen too much of the world's cruelty. Above them, the vast Texas sky stretched endlessly, ablaze with more stars than Emma had ever seen in one place. The sight never failed to humble her, reminding her how small her problems were in the grand scheme of creation. "Look at that," she said softly, tilting her head back to gaze upward. "Have you ever seen anything so beautiful?" Stone followed her gaze, and his expression softened slightly. "It's something, all right. When I was little, my father used to tell me stories about the constellations. See that group there?" Emma pointed to a cluster of bright stars. That's Cassiopeia, the vain queen who is punished for her pride. And there's the Big Dipper, which the Greeks called Ursa Major, the Great Bear. Your father taught you astronomy? Among other things. He said a person should never stop learning, no matter how old they get. Emma's voice carried a hint of wistfulness. He had so many dreams for this ranch. He wanted to breed the finest horses in Texas, maybe even ship them back east. He said our bloodlines were special. They are, Stone said quietly. I've seen a lot of horse flesh in my travels, but your stallion is something exceptional. Emma felt a warm glow at his words. Thunder's great-great-grandsire was a Spanish barb brought over by the conquistadors. The bloodline's been carefully maintained for generations. If I can get him back, establish a proper breeding program, you'll save the ranch. More than that, I'll honor my father's memory by making his dream come true. Emma's voice grew fierce with determination. I won't let Malcolm Hendricks or anyone else take that away from me. Stone studied her profile, admiring the strength in her jaw and the fire in her eyes. Emma Whitmore was a woman who would fight for what she believed in, no matter the cost. It was both inspiring and terrifying. What will you do if we don't get the horses back? He asked gently. Emma was quiet for a moment. I don't know. I've been so focused on this being my only chance that I haven't let myself think about failure. She looked at him with eyes that held both fear and resolve. But I suppose I'd find another way. Whitmores don't give up easily. No, Stone agreed. I don't imagine they do. A rumble of thunder echoed across the plains, and Emma glanced up to see clouds gathering on the horizon. Looks like we're in for some weather. As if summoned by her words, a cool wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and causing the fire to dance more wildly. Billy stirred in his sleep, mumbling something incoherent before settling back into slumber. There's an old cabin about a mile east of here, Emma said, watching the approaching storm. We could shelter there if this gets bad. Stone nodded, already mentally calculating the distance and the time they'd need to reach safety. We should move now before the rain starts in earnest. They woke Billy and quickly broke camp, leading the horses through the darkness toward Emma's promised shelter. The first fat raindrops began falling just as they reached the abandoned cabin, and within minutes the sky opened up in a torrent that would have soaked them to the skin. The cabin was small and clearly hadn't been occupied in years, but the roof was intact and the walls solid. Emma quickly found an old lantern and matches, filling the space with warm, flickering light. Billy claimed a corner and was asleep again within minutes, leaving Stone and Emma alone in the intimate space. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. Lightning split the sky in brilliant white forks, and thunder crashed so loudly that the cabin's windows rattled in their frames. Rain drummed against the roof like bullets, and the wind howled around the eaves with voices that sounded almost human. I've never seen a storm come up so fast, Emma said, moving to peer out the window at the chaos beyond. Stone joined her, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Texas weather, he said with a slight smile. Peaceful one minute, trying to kill you the next. Emma laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise them both in the storm's fury. That's certainly true. I remember one summer when I was 12, a tornado touched down not 2 miles from our ranch. Daddy and I spent an hour in the root cellar listening to it tear across the prairie. Were you scared? Terrified, Emma admitted, but also fascinated. There's something about the raw power of nature that makes you feel so small and yet so alive at the same time. Stone nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. It puts things in perspective. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the storm paint the world in shades of silver and black. Emma was acutely aware of Stone's presence beside her, the solid strength of his frame and the subtle scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to his clothes. Jed, she said softly, what you told me about your family, I want you to know that their deaths weren't your fault. Stone's body went rigid. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Emma turned to face him, her green eyes bright with conviction. You can't be everywhere at once. You can't protect everyone all the time. Sometimes terrible things happen despite our best efforts. If I'd been there, You might have died with them, Emma said firmly. And then who would have brought justice to the men who killed them? Who would be here now, helping me get my horses back? Stone stared down at her, something raw and vulnerable flickering in his gray eyes. Emma, you spent 5 years punishing yourself for being human, she continued, her voice gentle but relentless. But healing isn't betraying their memory. Living isn't dishonoring their sacrifice. The words hit Stone like physical blows. For 5 years, he'd wrapped his guilt around himself like armor, using it to justify his isolation and his dangerous profession. But standing here in the lamplight, looking into Emma's compassionate eyes, he felt that armor beginning to crack. I don't know how to be anything else, he whispered. You don't have to figure it all out tonight, Emma said softly. But maybe you could try believing that you deserve happiness, that you deserve peace. Stone reached out slowly, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. Emma's breath caught at the touch, her heart beginning to race as she saw the longing in his eyes. Emma, he said again, her name a prayer on his lips. She stepped closer, drawn by something stronger than logic or caution. His hand cupped her face more fully, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. I shouldn't, he said, even as his head began to lower toward hers. Neither should I, Emma whispered back. But I want to. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle at first, hesitant and questioning. But as Emma's arms came up to encircle his neck, Stone deepened the kiss, pouring years of loneliness and longing into the contact. Emma responded with equal fervor, her heart pounding against her ribs as she tasted the promise of something she'd never dared hope for. The storm raged around them, but inside the cabin, time seemed suspended. Stone's hands tangled in Emma's hair, and she pressed closer to him, marveling at the strength in his arms and the way he held her as if she were infinitely precious. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Stone rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if he were in pain. This is madness, he said hoarsely. Is it? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Or is it the first sane thing either of us has done in years? Stone pulled back, his expression torn between desire and something that looked like fear. Emma, you don't understand. I'm not a man who can offer you a future. I'm not even sure I'll survive the next year, much less. I'm not asking for promises, Emma interrupted, though her heart ached at his words. I'm not asking for anything except this moment. But you deserve more. You deserve a man who can give you the life you want, the ranch you're fighting for, children. That's not your decision to make, Emma said firmly. What I deserve, what I want, those are my choices. Stone stared at her for a long moment, then stepped back with visible effort. No, I won't do this to you. I won't let you throw away your chance at happiness for a broken-down ranger with nothing to offer. Emma felt tears prick her eyes, but she lifted her chin stubbornly. And I won't let you make that choice for me, but I understand. Her voice grew cool, professional. You're right, of course. We both have more important things to focus on. I need to save my ranch, and you have outlaws to catch. The distance she put between them was more than physical, and Stone felt it like a knife to the chest. But it was better this way. Emma deserved better than him, and the sooner they both accepted that, the safer she would be. We should get some rest, he said gruffly. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Emma nodded, moving to claim a spot on the far side of the cabin. Good night, Captain Stone. The formal address stung, but Stone accepted it as necessary. Good night, Miss Whitmore. As Emma settled into her bedroll, she stared at the ceiling and listened to the storm slowly passing overhead. Her lips still tingled from Jed's kiss, and her heart ached with the knowledge that he was too honorable to pursue something that might bring them both happiness. But she understood his reasoning, even if she disagreed with it. They both had battles to fight, losses to avenge, dreams to pursue. Perhaps it was better to focus on those goals instead of the impossible attraction that sparked between them. Still, as sleep finally claimed her, Emma couldn't help but wonder what might have been if they'd met under different circumstances. If he'd been just a man and she just a woman. with no ghosts haunting their past and no desperate mission driving their future. Across the cabin, Stone lay awake staring at the dying embers of the lantern. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to go to Emma, to hold her close and damn the consequences. But his conscience and his genuine care for her held him back. She was light and hope and everything good in the world. He was darkness and violence and death. The kiss they'd shared was a glimpse of paradise, but paradise wasn't meant for men like him. Tomorrow they would face the Blackwood Gate. Tomorrow he would do his job and help Emma recover her horses, and then he would ride away, leaving her to build the life she deserved with someone worthy of her love. It was the right thing to do, the noble thing. So why did it feel like it was killing him? Chapter 4. The Betrayal. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she crouched behind the rocky outcropping, studying the hidden canyon spread out below them. There, grazing peacefully in the lush grass beside a small stream, were her 5 stolen horses. Thunder stood apart from the others, his magnificent black coat gleaming in the morning sun as he lifted his head to test the wind. "There they are," she whispered to Captain Stone, who lay flat on his belly beside her, spyglass trained on the camp below. "I count 4 men," Stone murmured, his voice barely audible. "Blackwood's there by the fire, and I can see 2 others near the horses. The 4th is keeping watch from that ledge on the far side." Emma studied the layout with a tracker's eye, noting the narrow entrance to the box canyon and the steep walls that made escape nearly impossible once inside. "It's a perfect natural corral. No wonder they use it for hiding stolen stock." "Too perfect," Stone said grimly. "One way in, one way out. If this goes wrong, we'll be trapped." Behind them, Billy Santos shifted nervously among the rocks where they'd positioned him with the horses. The boy had proven his worth during the night, leading them to this hidden stronghold through treacherous terrain that would have taken Stone hours to navigate alone. "What's the plan?" Emma asked, checking her colt for the 10th time. Stone closed the spyglass and turned to face her, his steel-gray eyes serious. "Billy and I go down through the main entrance nice and easy. They'll expect him to be reporting back from his scouting mission. Once we're close enough, we take them." "What about me?" "You stay here with the rifles. If shooting starts, you cover our retreat." Emma's green eyes flashed with indignation. "Those are my horses down there, Captain. I'm not staying behind like some helpless—" "You're staying because I need someone I trust watching our backs," Stone interrupted firmly. "This isn't about your capabilities, Emma. It's about tactics." The use of her first name, spoken in his low, rough voice, sent an unwelcome thrill through her. Despite everything that had passed between them in the cabin last night, or perhaps because of it, the formal distance they'd maintained all morning felt forced and painful. "All right," she said finally, "but if you get yourself killed down there, I'm coming after you." Something flickered in Stone's eyes, surprise perhaps, or pleasure at her concern. "I'll keep that in mind." He turned to Billy, who was pale but determined. "Remember, act natural. You're just reporting that the trail was clear. Don't do anything to alert them until I give the signal." Billy nodded, swallowing hard. "What if they don't believe me?" "Then we improvise," Stone said grimly. He checked his weapons one final time, then looked back at Emma. "Give us 10 minutes to get into position. If you hear shooting, I know what to do." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Emma felt the weight of all the words they couldn't say. Then Stone was moving, ghosting down the rocky slope with Billy close behind, both men keeping to the shadows and patches of scrub brush. Emma settled herself behind the largest boulder and trained her rifle on the camp below. From this vantage point, she could see the entire canyon floor and the narrow entrance where Stone and Billy would appear. Her palms were slick with sweat despite the cool morning air. Minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Emma watched Stone and Billy work their way down the treacherous path, her heart in her throat every time loose rock shifted beneath their feet. One wrong step, one careless sound, and the whole plan would collapse. Finally, they reached the canyon floor. Billy straightened his shoulders and walked boldly toward the camp, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Jake, made it back safe. Trail's clear as promised." Jake Blackwood looked up from the fire where he'd been cooking breakfast, his weathered face breaking into a grin. "Good man, Billy. I was starting to worry." He gestured toward the coffee pot. Pour yourself some and tell us what you saw. Emma held her breath as Billy approached the fire, Stone moving like a shadow along the canyon wall behind him. Everything was going according to plan. In another minute, they'd have the drop on the outlaws. Then disaster struck from an unexpected quarter. Well, well, a familiar voice drawled from the canyon entrance behind Stone. What have we here? Emma's blood turned to ice as Malcolm Hendricks stepped into view, flanked by two of his hired guns. The cattle baron was impeccably dressed despite the early hour, his silver hair gleaming beneath his expensive hat. But it was the cold satisfaction in his pale blue eyes that made Emma's stomach clench with dread. Stone spun toward the new threat, his hand flashing to his gun, but Hendricks's men were ready for him. The sharp crack of rifle fire echoed off the canyon walls, and Stone stumbled, clutching his left shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. "Drop it, Ranger," Hendricks commanded pleasantly, "unless you'd prefer to join your ancestors right here and now." Stone's jaw clenched, but he let his Colt fall to the dirt. Around the camp, Blackwood's men had drawn their weapons, all pointing at the wounded lawman. "Well, I'll be damned," Blackwood said, his voice filled with admiration. "Malcolm Hendricks himself, come calling, and he's brought us a Texas Ranger all wrapped up with a bow." Emma's mind reeled as the implications hit her. Hendricks and the Blackwood gang were working together. The cattle baron hadn't just been opportunistically buying stolen horses, he'd been orchestrating the thefts himself. "Actually, Jake, I believe there are more guests to our little party," Hendricks said, his cold gaze sweeping the canyon rim. "Miss Emma Whitmore, I know you're up there. Why don't you come down and join us? Unless, of course, you'd prefer to watch Captain Stone bleed to death from a comfortable distance." Emma's hands tightened on her rifle. From her position, she might be able to pick off one or two of them, but not all. And Stone was already wounded, trapped in the open with nowhere to take cover. "I'm waiting, Miss Whitmore," Hendricks called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "My patience has limits, and the good captain's shoulder wound needs attention." With bitter resignation, Emma rose from behind the boulder and began the treacherous climb down into the canyon. Every step felt like a descent into hell, but she couldn't abandon Stone to face this alone. "There's a sensible girl," Hendricks said as she emerged onto the canyon floor, her rifle held high in surrender. "I do admire practical thinking." One of his men quickly relieved her of her weapons while another bound her hands behind her back with rough rope. Emma bit back a cry of pain as the bonds cut into her wrists, determined not to give Hendricks the satisfaction of seeing her break. Stone tried to move toward her, his face gray with pain and fury, but Jake Blackwood's gun barrel against his temple stopped him cold. "Easy there, Ranger," the outlaw leader said with a cruel smile. "No sudden moves, or the little lady gets to watch you die." "Very good, Jake," Hendricks said approvingly. "Now let's get our guests settled while I explain the situation." They were forced to sit with their backs against the canyon wall, Stone's wounded shoulder leaving a growing stain on the rock behind him. Billy Santos stood frozen by the dying campfire, his young face pale with shock and confusion. "I don't understand," the boy stammered. "Mr. Hendricks, what are you doing here? I thought—" "You thought many things, my boy, most of them incorrect," Hendricks said smoothly. He settled himself on a convenient boulder, looking for all the world like a gentleman taking tea instead of a criminal mastermind. "Allow me to enlighten you all about the true situation." Emma's heart sank as the pieces fell into place. "You've been behind the rustling all along. The attacks on the small ranchers, the stolen horses, it was all you. Clever girl, yes. I've been conducting something of a campaign to consolidate the best ranch land in the territory. Amazing how quickly people become willing to sell when their livelihood keeps disappearing." "You bastard," Stone growled, his voice tight with pain. "How many families have you destroyed?" Hendricks shrugged elegantly. "Progress requires sacrifice, Captain. I'm building an empire that will span half of Texas. A few struggling homesteaders are hardly worth considering in such grand schemes." "And Sheriff Hawkins?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. "Hawkins understands the value of cooperation. He's been quite helpful in ensuring that investigations into these unfortunate rustling incidents go nowhere. Emma felt sick. The corruption ran deeper than she'd imagined, reaching into the very heart of what should have been justice and law. "What I don't understand," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "is why you'd risk exposing yourself by coming here personally." Hendrick's pale eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Because, my dear Ms. Whitmore, you've become something of a problem. Your stubborn refusal to accept my generous offers for your land has forced me to take more direct action. My father would never have sold to you, and neither will I. But circumstances have changed dramatically, haven't they?" Hendricks rose and began pacing, his expensive boots crunching on the rocky ground. "You see, I had planned for Jake's men to simply steal your horses and leave you no choice but to accept my final offer, but then you had to involve a Texas Ranger and complicate matters." Stone tried to shift position and winced as the movement sent fresh blood flowing from his shoulder. "Get to the point, Hendricks." "The point, Captain, is that Miss Whitmore now finds herself in a rather unique position to help me solve several problems at once." Hendricks turned to face Emma directly, his smile as cold as winter. "I'm prepared to offer you a bargain." "I'm not interested in any bargain you might." "You'll want to hear this one," Hendricks interrupted smoothly. "You see, I have something you want. Your horses, obviously. But I also have something else of value." He gestured, and one of his men disappeared through a crack in the canyon wall that Emma hadn't noticed before. Minutes later, he returned, dragging a familiar figure. Old Pete, bound and bloodied but mercifully alive. "Pete!" Emma cried out, struggling against her bonds. The elderly ranch hand raised his head with effort, his kind brown eyes finding hers across the camp. "Miss Emma, I'm sorry. They came to the ranch after you left, looking for information. I didn't tell them nothing, but—" "Enough," Hendricks snapped. "Now, Miss Whitmore, let me explain your options. Option 1, you can continue your stubborn refusal to cooperate, in which case Captain Stone dies from his wound. Quite slowly and painfully, I'm afraid. Old Pete here meets an unfortunate end as well. Your horses disappear forever, your ranch is foreclosed upon, and you're left with absolutely nothing." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as the full scope of Hendrick's cruelty became clear. "Option 2, he continued, is much more civilized. You agree to marry me, a perfectly respectable arrangement that will unite our properties and give you the security you've been seeking. Captain Stone receives medical attention and is released to continue his career elsewhere. Old Pete returns safely to tend whatever stock remains on your ranch. Everyone lives, everyone prospers, except for all the other ranchers you'll destroy to build your empire," Emma said bitterly. "Their fate is sealed regardless of your decision. Your cooperation simply determines whether the people you care about survive to see the new order I'm creating." Stone struggled to sit up straighter, his face pale but his voice strong. "Emma, don't listen to him. Men like Hendricks don't keep bargains with people they see as inferior." "The ranger makes a valid point," Hendricks acknowledged, "so let me offer proof of my sincerity." He drew a small derringer from his vest and pointed it casually at Stone's head. "Agree to my proposal now, Miss Whitmore, and I'll have Captain Stone's wound properly tended. Refuse, and I'll put him out of his misery this very moment." Emma stared at the tiny gun, knowing that at this range it would be more than sufficient to kill. Stone's gray eyes met hers, and she saw him try to communicate something. Defiance, perhaps, or a plea for her not to sacrifice herself for his sake. But Emma also saw old Pete, who'd been like a grandfather to her since her father's death. She saw Billy Santos trembling with fear as he realized the true scope of the evil he'd become entangled with. She saw her beautiful horses, who would disappear forever if she didn't act. Most of all, she saw Jed Stone, wounded and bleeding because he'd tried to help her recover what was rightfully hers. The man who'd held her so tenderly in the cabin, who'd shared his deepest pain with her, who'd kissed her with a passion that still made her pulse race. She couldn't let him die, not for her pride, not for her principles, not even for her father's memory. "All right," she said quietly. "I accept your proposal." "Emma, no!" Stone lunged forward, despite his wound, but Jake Blackwood struck him viciously with his rifle butt, sending the ranger crashing back against the canyon wall. "Excellent," Hendricks said, his satisfaction evident. I knew you were a sensible woman beneath all that stubborn independence. Jake, see that Captain Stone's wound is cleaned and bandaged. We wouldn't want him dying on us now, would we?" As Blackwood grudgingly began tending to Stone's injury, Hendricks approached Emma with that cold smile still playing about his lips. "You've made the right choice, my dear. In time, you'll come to appreciate the advantages of being Mrs. Malcolm Hendricks. Wealth, position, security, everything a woman could desire. Except freedom," Emma said, her voice hollow. "Freedom is overrated," Hendricks replied dismissively. "Order and prosperity are far more valuable. You'll understand that once we're properly wed." Emma closed her eyes, feeling as if her soul was being torn in half. She'd saved the lives of the people she cared about. But at what cost? Her father's dream, her independence, her chance at the kind of love she'd glimpsed in Stone's arms, all of it sacrificed to a man who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. Behind her closed lids, she could still see the anguish in Stone's face when she'd accepted Hendricks' proposal. He probably thought she'd chosen wealth and security over love, just like his Sarah would have if she'd lived to make such a choice. If only he knew the truth. That she was doing this for him, to save his life and give him a chance to escape this nightmare. Perhaps someday he would understand. Perhaps someday he would forgive her. But as Hendricks began making plans for their immediate departure to his ranch, Emma feared that someday would never come. She'd made her choice, and now she would have to live with the consequences, no matter how much they cost her heart. Chapter 5: The Sacrifice. The Hendricks mansion sat on a hill overlooking Cedar Creek like a monument to wealth and power, its white columns gleaming in the afternoon sun. Emma stood at the window of what had once been the guest room and was now her gilded prison, watching the town below go about its daily business, unaware that their lives were controlled by the man who'd bought their sheriff and terrorized their neighbors. 3 days had passed since her capture in the canyon, 3 days of being treated like a prized possession rather than a human being. Hendricks had been the perfect gentleman on the surface, providing her with elegant gowns, fine meals, and a comfortable room, but the locked door and armed guards made her situation crystal clear. "Miss Emma," a soft voice interrupted her brooding. "Mr. Hendricks sent me to help you dress for dinner." Emma turned to see Maria, Hendricks's young Mexican housekeeper, holding a burgundy silk gown that probably cost more than most people in Cedar Creek earned in a year. The girl's dark eyes held sympathy and something else, a flicker of understanding that made Emma wonder how much she knew about her employer's true nature. "Thank you, Maria," Emma said quietly, accepting the dress. "Tell me, how long have you worked for Mr. Hendricks?" Maria's hands trembled slightly as she began unlacing Emma's day dress. 2 years, señorita, since my papa died and left me with nowhere to go." There was something in the girl's voice that made Emma study her more carefully. Maria couldn't be more than 16, with the kind of delicate beauty that would attract unwanted attention from powerful men. "Has he been kind to you?" Emma asked carefully. Maria's eyes darted toward the door, then back to Emma's face. "He is my patron," she said simply, but Emma caught the fear beneath the words. Another victim, Emma thought with rising anger. How many lives had Hendricks destroyed in his quest for power? How many people lived in fear of crossing him? "Maria," Emma said softly, "if you ever need help, if you ever want to leave this place—" "No," Maria whispered urgently. "Please, señorita, the walls have ears here. Mr. Hendricks, he knows everything that happens in his house." Emma nodded, understanding, but she filed the information away, adding it to the growing list of crimes she was documenting. Somewhere in this house, Hendricks kept records of his illegal activities. Emma was determined to find them. As Maria helped her into the expensive gown, Emma's mind worked frantically. She'd been watching the guards' routines, learning the layout of the house, searching for any weakness she could exploit. Tonight, when Hendricks retired to his study after dinner, she would make her move. The dining room was a testament to Hendricks' wealth, with crystal chandeliers, imported furniture, and paintings that probably cost more than most ranches. Emma took her place at the massive table, feeling like a lamb being fattened for slaughter. "You look lovely, my dear," Hendricks said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "That color suits you admirably." Emma forced herself to smile. "Thank you. The dress is beautiful. Only the finest for my future wife." Hendricks raised his wineglass in a mock toast. To our upcoming nuptials. Emma lifted her own glass, but didn't drink. When exactly are you planning this wedding? This Sunday, in the town church. I've already spoken with Reverend Thompson. He's delighted to perform the ceremony. So soon? Emma's heart sank. Sunday was only 4 days away. I see no reason to delay. Once we're married, you'll be the mistress of one of the largest spreads in Texas. Your financial worries will be a thing of the past. And what about Captain Stone? You promised he would be released. Hendrick's expression grew cold. The good captain was released this morning, as agreed. He's free to continue his career elsewhere. Emma felt a stab of pain at the casual dismissal. Jed was alive and free, which was all that mattered. But the thought of him riding away, believing she'd chosen wealth over love, made her chest ache with a grief she couldn't. What about old Pete? Your faithful ranch hand has been returned to tend your remaining stock. A generous gesture, considering his property now belongs to me. Emma's hands clenched in her lap. The ranch was never yours to take? Ah, but it will be once we're married. Community property laws, my dear, your debts become mine, your assets become mine. A perfectly legal arrangement. The satisfied smile on his face made Emma want to throw her wineglass at him. Instead, she forced herself to nod meekly. I understand you're a practical man, Mr. Hendricks, but surely you want a wife who comes to you willingly, not one who's been coerced. In time, you'll see the advantages of our arrangement. Affection can grow from mutual respect and shared interests. What he meant, Emma knew, was that in time he expected her to accept her fate and stop fighting him. The thought made her skin crawl. After dinner, as Hendricks retired to his study with his brandy and cigars, Emma made her excuse about needing to rest. But instead of going to her room, she crept down the back stairs, her silk slippers silent on the wooden steps. The house was quiet except for the distant murmur of voices from the kitchen where the servants were cleaning up. Emma slipped through the darkened hallways, her heart pounding as she approached Hendricks's private office. The door was locked. But Emma had learned a few useful skills growing up on a ranch. A hairpin and some careful manipulation got her inside within minutes. The office was a shrine to Hendrick's ambitions, with maps of Texas covering one wall, each marked with colored pins indicating properties he owned or wanted to acquire. Emma's breath caught as she saw the scope of his plans. He intended to control half the state. She moved to his desk, searching through drawers for anything that might serve as evidence. In the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a false bottom, she found what she was looking for. A ledger containing detailed records of every illegal transaction, every bribe paid, every family terrorized into selling their land. Emma's hands shook as she flipped through the pages. Here was proof of Hendrick's crimes, documented in his own handwriting. Sheriff Hawkins' payments, the locations of stolen livestock, even the names of families who'd been murdered when they refused to cooperate. A sound in the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps were approaching the office. Emma quickly memorized what she could from the ledger, then returned it to its hiding place and crept toward the window. The footsteps passed by, but Emma's heart continued to race. She'd found what she needed, but getting it to the right authorities would be another challenge entirely. With Hawkins in Hendrick's pocket and the nearest honest lawman days away, she needed to find another solution. The next morning brought news that made Emma's blood run cold. Maria entered her room with trembling hands, her face pale with fear. Senorita, there are men in town asking questions about you and Mr. Hendricks. The patron is very angry. Emma's heart leaped. What kind of men? I don't know, but Mr. Hendricks sent word to the sheriff. He says anyone who interferes with his wedding will be dealt with permanently. Emma felt a chill of fear. If Jed had returned, if he was trying to help her, Hendricks would have him killed without hesitation. Maria, I need you to get a message to someone in town. Can you do that? The girl's eyes widened with terror. I cannot, señorita. If Mr. Hendricks found out... He won't, Emma said firmly. But if you help me, I can make sure he never hurts anyone again. Maria stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? Emma quickly wrote a note, encoding it in language that would mean nothing to Hendricks, but would be clear to its intended recipient. She folded it carefully and pressed it into Maria's hand. Take this to the saloon. Ask for a man named Billy Santos. If he's not there, find Tom Bradley at the general store. Tell them it's from a friend who needs help. Maria tucked the note into her apron and hurried away, leaving Emma to pace her room like a caged animal. She'd set events in motion now, but whether they would lead to freedom or disaster remained to be seen. The afternoon brought visitors to the mansion, and Emma's heart sank when she heard familiar voices in the front hall. Through her window, she could see Jed's bay gelding tied to the hitching post, his distinctive Texas Ranger tack unmistakable. He'd come back for her. The realization filled her with equal parts joy and terror. Joy that he cared enough to risk his life for her, terror that Hendricks would make good on his threats. "Miss Whitmore," Hendricks called from the bottom of the stairs, "you have a visitor. Do join us in the parlor." Emma's hands shook as she smoothed her hair and checked her appearance in the mirror. She had to convince Jed to leave, had to make him believe she didn't want his help. It was the only way to keep him alive. The parlor was a battlefield of polite conversation and underlying tension. Jed stood near the fireplace, his left arm still in a sling from his shoulder wound, his steel-gray eyes burning with barely controlled fury. Sheriff Hawkins lounged in a chair nearby, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "Captain Stone," Emma said, her voice carefully neutral, "I wasn't expecting you." Jed's gaze swept over her, taking in the expensive gown, the elegant surroundings, the way she held herself like a lady of leisure. What he saw seemed to confirm his worst fears. "I came to make sure you were all right," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Apparently, I needn't have worried. Emma felt each word like a physical blow, but she kept her expression composed. "As you can see, I'm perfectly fine. Mr. Hendricks has been very kind to me. Kind." Jed repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Is that what you call it?" "Gentleman." Hendricks interjected smoothly. "Perhaps we should discuss this matter privately." "Miss Whitmore, my dear, would you excuse us?" "No," Emma said quickly. "I think I should hear whatever Captain Stone has to say." Jed's jaw tightened. "What I have to say is simple. I came to offer you a choice, Emma. You can come with me now, or you can stay here and become Mrs. Malcolm Hendricks, but I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you tell me which life you're choosing." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Emma could see the pain in Jed's eyes, the desperate hope he was trying to hide. She longed to throw herself into his arms, to tell him the truth about her sacrifice, but she could also see Hawkins' hand on his gun, could feel Hendricks' cold satisfaction radiating from across the room. One wrong word, one sign that she was being coerced, and Jed would end up dead. "I've made my choice," she said quietly. "I'm marrying Mr. Hendricks on Sunday." Jed's face went white. "Just like that, after everything we shared, everything we felt?" "What we felt was attraction, nothing more," Emma lied, hating herself for every word. "Mr. Hendricks can offer me security, a future. What could you offer me, Captain? A life of following you from town to town, never knowing if you'd come home alive?" The words hit their mark. Jed's expression crumbled, and for a moment Emma saw the lost, broken man beneath the ranger's tough exterior. "I see," he said, finally. "I suppose I should congratulate you then. You found yourself a rich husband. That's what you wanted all along, isn't it?" Emma felt tears threaten, but she blinked them back. "I want stability. I want a home where I don't have to worry about losing everything I care about. And love?" Jed's voice was barely a whisper. "Does love matter at all?" Emma met his gaze steadily, praying he would see the truth she couldn't speak aloud. "Love is a luxury I can't afford." Something died in Jed's eyes at those words. His shoulders straightened, and when he spoke again, his voice was cold and professional. "Then I wish you happiness, Miss Whitmore. May you find everything you're looking for." He turned to go, then paused at the doorway. "For what it's worth, I hope he makes you happy. You deserve better than a broken-down ranger with nothing to offer but a life of uncertainty." With that, he was gone, leaving Emma feeling as if her heart had been torn from her chest. She stood frozen in the parlor, listening to his boots on the front steps, the creak of leather as he mounted his horse, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. "Well," Hendricks said with satisfaction, "that's settled then. Sheriff, thank you for your assistance. I trust the good captain won't be bothering us again." "He won't," Hawkins said grimly. "I made it clear that his interference wouldn't be tolerated. If he's smart, he'll be out of the territory by nightfall." Emma wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all. Instead, she excused herself and fled to her room, where she could finally let the tears fall. She'd saved Jed's life, but at what cost? He would never forgive her for what he saw as her betrayal. He would carry the pain of her rejection for the rest of his life, never knowing that she'd chosen to sacrifice her own happiness for his safety. As night fell over Cedar Creek, Emma sat by her window and watched the town lights twinkle below. Somewhere out there, Jed was probably drinking himself into oblivion, convinced that the woman he'd begun to love had chosen money over him. The irony was cruel. She loved him more than her own life, but the only way to prove it was to let him believe she didn't love him at all. 3 more days until the wedding. 3 more days to find evidence that would destroy Hendricks and free herself from this nightmare. 3 more days to somehow get word to the authorities before it was too late. Emma dried her tears and set her jaw with determination. She'd made her sacrifice, but she wasn't giving up. Somehow she would find a way to expose Hendricks' crimes and win back her freedom. And maybe, if she was very lucky, she would find a way to explain the truth to Jed Stone before it was too late for both of them. But first, she had to survive the next 3 days without losing her mind or her hope. In a house full of enemies, with her wedding to a monster approaching fast, Emma had never felt more alone. Outside her window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising another night of thunder and lightning. But this time, Emma wouldn't be sharing the storm with the man she loved. This time, she would face it alone. Chapter 6, The Truth Revealed. The whiskey burned as it went down, but not nearly enough to numb the pain in Jed Stone's chest. He sat hunched over the bar in Murphy's Saloon in Millerville, 30 miles from Cedar Creek, staring into the amber liquid as if it held answers to questions he couldn't bear to ask. 3 days had passed since Emma's rejection, 3 days of riding hard and drinking harder, trying to outrun the memory of her voice saying love was a luxury she couldn't afford. The words echoed in his mind like a curse, confirming every bitter lesson life had taught him about trusting his heart to a woman. "Another," he said hoarsely, sliding his empty glass across the scarred wooden bar. The bartender, a grizzled man named Murphy, no relation to the saloon keeper in Cedar Creek, gave him a concerned look. "Don't you think you've had enough, mister? Been nursing that bottle for 2 days straight?" "I'll tell you when I've had enough," Jed growled, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. Murphy raised his hands peacefully and poured another shot. The few other patrons in the dim saloon kept their distance, recognizing the dangerous mood of a man with nothing left to lose. Jed had turned in his ranger badge that morning, unable to face the thought of continuing in a job that had cost him everything he'd ever cared about. Captain Morrison had tried to talk him out of it, but Jed's mind was made up. He was through being a lawman, through trying to save people who didn't want to be saved. "Senor Stone?" The tentative voice came from behind him. Jed turned on his bar stool to see an elderly Mexican man standing in the doorway, hat in hand, his weathered face creased with worry. "Old Pete?" Jed blinked, wondering if the whiskey was making him hallucinate. "What the hell are you doing here?" Pete hurried forward, his eyes darting nervously around the saloon. "I've been looking for you for 2 days, senor. Maria, she told me you might be here." "Maria?" Jed's befuddled brain struggled to place the name. "The girl who works for Senor Hendricks. She got word to me that you had left town." Pete's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "Senor, we need to talk. About Miss Emma." The name hit Jed like a physical blow. "I don't want to hear about Emma. She made her choice." "No, senor, you don't understand. She didn't choose. She chose a rich husband over a broken-down ex-ranger," Jed interrupted bitterly. "I was there, Pete. I heard her say it." Pete's calloused hand gripped Jed's arm with surprising strength. Please, Signor, 5 minutes. That's all I ask. Then if you still want to drink yourself to death, I won't stop you." Something in the old man's voice penetrated Jed's alcoholic haze. Pete had been Emma's father's friend, had helped raise her after her mother died. He wouldn't have ridden 30 miles just to make conversation. 5 minutes, Jed agreed reluctantly. Pete led him to a corner table, away from the other patrons. As they sat down, Jed noticed for the first time the rope burns on Pete's wrists, the bruises on his face that were just beginning to fade. "What happened to you?" Jed asked, his lawman's instincts overriding his self-pity. Pete rolled up his sleeves, revealing more evidence of rough treatment. "Hendrix's men. They came to the ranch the day after you and Miss Emma rode out. Said they were looking for information about where you'd gone. Did you tell them?" "Nothing," Pete said proudly, but they didn't believe me. Kept me tied up in the barn for 3 days, trying to make me talk. Finally, one of them, a young vaquero named Carlos, he helped me escape, said he couldn't stand to see an old man treated so badly. Jed felt a stab of guilt. Pete had suffered because of his involvement in the search for Emma's horses. "I'm sorry, Pete. I never meant for you to get hurt. That's not why I'm here, Signor." Pete leaned forward, his brown eyes intense. "I'm here because Miss Emma, she's in terrible danger, and you're the only one who can help her. She doesn't want my help. She made that clear enough." Pete's weathered face creased with frustration. "Signor, you are a smart man. You've been a lawman for many years, but you don't understand women, especially not a woman like Miss Emma." "I understand enough," Jed said bitterly. "I understand that when push came to shove, she chose security over love." "Did she?" Pete challenged. "Or did she choose to save your life?" The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Jed stared at the old man, his alcohol-clouded mind struggling to process the implication. "What are you talking about?" Pete glanced around the saloon, then leaned closer. "Maria, she heard everything. Hendrix, he didn't just threaten Miss Emma, he threatened to kill you if she didn't agree to marry him. And me too." The room seemed to tilt around Jed. "That's impossible. She never said—" "What could she say? You think Hendrix would have let her explain with his men standing right there, with Sheriff Hawkins ready to put a bullet in you the moment she opened her mouth?" Jed's hand gripped his whiskey glass so hard his knuckles went white. "You're saying she sacrificed herself to save me?" "I'm saying Miss Emma loves you more than her own life," Pete said simply. "And right now, she's trapped in that house with a man who means to destroy her completely." The whiskey turned to acid in Jed's stomach. He thought back to that scene in Hendrix's parlor, tried to remember Emma's exact words, her expression. Had there been something in her eyes, some message he'd been too hurt and angry to see? "Tell me everything," he said hoarsely. Pete's story unfolded like a nightmare. Hendrix's systematic campaign to drive small ranchers off their land, his partnership with the Blackwood Gang, his corruption of local law enforcement. But it was the details about Emma's captivity that made Jed's blood run cold. "She's not just sitting there waiting to be rescued," Pete said with obvious pride. "Maria says she's been searching through Hendrix's private papers looking for evidence of his crimes. She found his ledger, the one where he keeps records of all his illegal dealings." "Evidence," Jed repeated, his mind beginning to clear despite the whiskey. "What's she planning to do with it?" "There's a territorial governor coming to Cedar Creek for Founders Day next week. Miss Emma, she was hoping to get the evidence to him somehow. But Hendrix, he suspects something. Maria heard him telling his men to watch Miss Emma more closely." Jed's heart began to race. "When is the wedding supposed to take place?" Pete's face went pale. "That's the worst part, Signor. It was supposed to be Sunday, but Hendrix moved it up. The wedding is tomorrow. Founders Day. He's going to marry her right before the governor arrives. Make it look like a celebration." "Tomorrow?" Jed shot to his feet, the chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "Why didn't you tell me this first?" "Because I needed you to understand why she did what she did," Pete said simply. "If you're going to save her, you have to know the truth about her sacrifice." Jed stared down at the old man, his mind reeling. Emma hadn't betrayed him. She'd saved his life at the cost of her own freedom. While he'd been drowning his sorrows in whiskey, she'd been risking everything to gather evidence against one of the most dangerous men in Texas. And tomorrow, if he didn't act, she would be forced to marry a monster. "I need to get back to Cedar Creek," he said, his voice rough with urgency. "See, but you cannot go alone. Hendricks has too many men, and Sheriff Hawkins will shoot you on sight if you show your face in town." Jed's jaw tightened. "And then I'll have to be careful not to let him see me. Senor, listen to me." Pete rose and gripped Jed's arm. "Miss Emma, she has friends in town. People who have suffered under Hendricks' thumb, who would help if they thought there was a chance to stop him. What are you suggesting?" "A plan, senor. Not just a rescue, but a way to expose Hendricks' crimes to the governor and everyone else. Miss Emma, she's been gathering evidence, but someone needs to make sure it reaches the right people." Despite his urgency, Jed recognized the wisdom in Pete's words. A direct assault on the Hendricks mansion would likely get them all killed and accomplish nothing. But a coordinated effort, timed to coincide with the governor's visit. "Tell me about these friends of Emma's," he said. Pete's weathered face brightened with hope. "Tom Bradley, for one. Hendricks' men burned his barn last month when he wouldn't sell his land. And the widow Morrison? They killed her husband when he tried to organize the other ranchers. There are others, senor. Good people who are tired of living in fear." Jed's mind began working, formulating a plan. It was risky, perhaps even desperate. But it might be their only chance to save Emma and stop Hendricks once and for all. "How do we contact them without alerting Hendricks?" "Maria," Pete said promptly. "She comes to town every day to buy supplies. She can carry messages, help coordinate. And Billy Santos? Is he still in town?" Pete nodded. "The boy, he's been staying with Tom Bradley. He feels terrible about what happened, wants to make it right." "Good, we'll need all the help we can get." Jed straightened his shoulders, feeling purpose flow back into his veins for the first time in days. "Can you get word to Maria tonight?" "Si, senor. What do you want me to tell her?" Jed was quiet for a moment, thinking through the logistics. "Tell her that tomorrow morning before the wedding, she needs to help Emma get that ledger out of Hendricks' office. We'll need it as evidence for the governor." "And if Hendricks catches her?" "He won't," Jed said grimly, "because by then he'll be dealing with bigger problems." Pete studied his face in the dim light of the saloon. "You have a plan, senor?" "The beginning of one." Jed's gray eyes hardened with determination. "Hendricks thinks he's won, thinks he's untouchable because he owns the local law. But he's forgotten one important thing." What's that?" "Emma Whitmore isn't just any woman. She's a fighter, and she's been gathering intelligence on him for days. With the right support, she could bring down his entire operation." "And you, senor? What will you do?" Jed's smile was grim and cold. "I'm going to remind Malcolm Hendricks that Texas Rangers don't give up easily, even ex-Rangers. He wants to play games with people's lives, then he's about to learn what it costs to threaten the woman I love." The admission surprised them both. Jed had never said the words aloud before, had barely admitted the truth to himself. But sitting in this dingy saloon, learning about Emma's sacrifice, he could no longer deny what his heart had known from the beginning. He loved Emma Whitmore, loved her courage, her strength, her compassion for people like Billy Santos and old Pete, loved the way she'd looked at him in the abandoned cabin, as if he were a man worth saving instead of a broken-down lawman with blood on his hands. And tomorrow, he was going to prove that love was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. "We ride tonight," he said, pushing away from the table. "Every minute we delay gives Hendricks more time to tighten his grip on Emma." Pete nodded, hope shining in his weathered face. "She never stopped believing you would come back for her, senor." Even when she couldn't say it, Maria could see it in her eyes. The words hit Jed like a physical blow. While he'd been wallowing in self-pity and whiskey, Emma had been holding on to faith that he would realize the truth. The thought of her trapped in that house, maintaining hope while surrounded by enemies, made his chest tight with emotion. "I let her down," he said quietly. "No, senor. You were hurt and angry, and you believed what you saw. That's human. But now you know the truth, and you're going to make it right." Jed nodded, his resolve hardening like steel. "Damn right I am." As they prepared to leave the saloon, Jed caught sight of himself in the mirror behind the bar. 3 days of hard drinking had left their mark. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes rumpled, his jaw dark with stubble. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who'd lost everything and was trying to drink away the pain. But beneath the damage, he could see something else returning to his eyes. Purpose. Fire. The look of a man who'd found something worth fighting for. Emma was counting on him, whether she knew it or not, and this time he wouldn't let her down. As they stepped out into the cool night air, Pete looked up at the star-studded sky. "It's a good night for riding, senor, and maybe for justice, too." Jed swung up onto his bay gelding, feeling more clear-headed than he had in days. "Justice is exactly what we're going to deliver, Pete. Malcolm Hendricks has terrorized this territory long enough. Tomorrow, his reign of fear comes to an end." They rode hard through the night, racing against time and Emma's wedding to a monster. Behind them, the saloon lights faded into darkness. Ahead lay Cedar Creek, and the most important battle of Jedstone's life. He'd failed Emma once by not seeing the truth of her sacrifice. He wouldn't fail her again. Chapter 7. Race Against Time. Dawn was breaking over Cedar Creek as Jedstone and Old Pete rode hard into town, their horses lathered with sweat from the punishing night ride. The main street was already bustling with activity as merchants prepared for Founders' Day festivities, colorful bunting strung between buildings, and a platform erected near the church for the territorial governor's address. Jed's keen eyes scanned the crowd, noting the forced cheer on many faces. These people were putting on a show for their distinguished visitor, but underneath the celebration lay the fear that had gripped the town for months. "There." Pete pointed toward the general store. "Tom Bradley." They dismounted and approached the weathered rancher who was loading supplies into his wagon with mechanical precision. Bradley looked up at their approach, his face going pale when he recognized Jed. "Captain Stone, I thought you'd left the territory." "I did. I'm back." Jed's voice carried an authority that made Bradley straighten unconsciously. "We need to talk, Tom. About Malcolm Hendricks and what he's done to this town." Bradley's eyes darted nervously around the street. "I don't know what you mean." "Your barn," Jed said quietly. "The one that burned down last month after you refused to sell your land to Hendricks. We know it wasn't an accident." The fight seemed to go out of Bradley's shoulders. "Even if that's true, what can we do about it? Sheriff Hawkins won't listen, and Hendricks owns half the county." "Not after today," Jed said firmly. "Emma Whitmore has been gathering evidence against Hendricks. Proof of his crimes, his connection to the Blackwood gang, his campaign of terror against honest ranchers." "Miss Emma?" Bradley's eyes widened. "But she's marrying Hendricks this morning. The whole town's talking about it." "She's being forced into that marriage to protect the people she cares about," Pete interjected. "Including you and your family, Tom. She sacrificed herself to save all of us." Bradley stared at them both, understanding dawning in his weathered face. "My God, what do you need me to do? Gather everyone who suffered under Hendricks' schemes." Jed said urgently. Quietly, "We meet at the old schoolhouse in 1 hour. And Tom, bring your rifle." As Bradley hurried away, Jed and Pete made their way through town, spreading the word to carefully selected allies. The widow Morrison, whose husband had been murdered for organizing resistance to Hendricks. The blacksmith, whose shop had been vandalized for refusing to shoe horses for the Blackwood gang. The banker, who'd been threatened for refusing to foreclose on properties Hendricks wanted. One by one, they agreed to help. Years of fear and oppression had created a powder keg of resentment that needed only the right spark to explode. At the abandoned schoolhouse on the edge of town, 15 men and women gathered in a circle of grim determination. Billy Santos sat among them, his young face set with resolve, having found his courage at last. "Listen carefully," Jed began. his voice carrying the authority of his ranger training. "In 2 hours, Malcolm Hendricks is going to marry Emma Whitmore in front of the territorial governor and half the county. What most people don't know is that Emma has spent the past week gathering evidence of Hendricks' crimes." He pulled out a folded paper that Maria had smuggled to Pete the night before. "This is a copy of pages from Hendricks's private ledger. Dates, amounts, names of everyone he's bribed or terrorized. It's enough to hang him 10 times over." Murmurs of amazement rippled through the group as they passed the paper around, recognizing names and incidents they'd thought were coincidences or accidents. "The problem," Jed continued, "is getting this evidence to the governor without getting Emma killed in the process. Hendricks isn't going to go quietly, and he has Emma right where he wants her." "What's your plan?" asked Widow Morrison, her voice sharp with years of suppressed anger. "We surround the church during the ceremony, not to disrupt the wedding initially, but to make sure Hendricks can't escape when we present the evidence to the governor. Billy, you and Tom position yourselves at the back doors. Mrs. Morrison, take 3 men and cover the side windows. The rest of us take the front." "What about Sheriff Hawkins?" Bradley asked. "He'll try to stop us." "Hawkins is finished," Jed said grimly. "His name is all over that ledger. When the governor sees the evidence, Hawkins will be lucky if he doesn't end up in chains alongside his boss." Billy Santos raised his hand tentatively. "What about the other gang members? Some of them might be in town for the wedding." Jed nodded approvingly at the boy's tactical thinking. "Good point. That's why we move fast and hit hard. No warning, no negotiation. We present the evidence, surround Hendricks, and let the territorial authorities handle the rest." "And if he tries to use Miss Emma as a shield?" Pete asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the room knew Hendricks was capable of such cowardice, and Emma's safety was paramount. "And we trust Emma to handle herself," Jed said finally. "She's not helpless, and she's been planning for this moment longer than any of us. But we make sure she's not alone when it happens." As the group dispersed to gather weapons and take their positions, Billy approached Jed with obvious nervousness. "Captain Stone, I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. If I hadn't been with the gang, none of this would have happened." Jed studied the young man's earnest face. "Billy, you made mistakes, but you're here now when it counts. That's what matters. I won't let you down again. I know you won't." The church bells began to chime 11 o'clock as Jed made his way toward the white clapboard building that dominated the town square. Already carriages were arriving with wedding guests, their occupants dressed in their finest clothes for what they believed would be a joyous celebration. If only they knew, Jed thought grimly, that they were about to witness the downfall of the man who'd terrorized their community for years. Through the church windows, he could see the interior filling with guests. At the front, near the altar, stood Malcolm Hendricks in an expensive black suit, his silver hair gleaming in the light from the stained glass windows. The man looked confident, satisfied, completely unaware that his empire was about to crumble around him. Near the back of the church, a distinguished man with a gray beard and military bearing sat in the place of honor. Territorial Governor Samuel Crawford, the key to Emma's salvation and Hendricks' destruction. "She's coming," Pete whispered from beside him. Jed's heart clenched as he saw Emma appear at the back of the church, escorted by 2 of Hendricks' men. She wore a white silk gown that probably cost more than most people earned in a year, her auburn hair arranged in an elaborate style beneath a delicate veil. To the casual observer, she looked every inch the radiant bride. But Jed could see the truth beneath the surface. The rigid set of her shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly as she held her bouquet, the pale cast to her normally vibrant complexion. This was a woman walking to her execution, not her wedding. The church organ began the wedding march, and Emma started down the aisle with measured steps. Each step took her closer to a future that would destroy everything she was, everything she believed in. Jed caught sight of Maria near the front of the church, the young housekeeper's dark eyes wide with fear. In her hand, she clutched a small object, the original ledger, Emma's insurance policy against Hendricks' threats. As Emma reached the halfway point down the aisle, Jed gave the signal. The church doors burst open simultaneously as his carefully positioned allies flooded into the building. Shouts of alarm rose from the congregation as armed men took positions at every exit, trapping the wedding party inside. "Nobody move," Jed commanded, his voice carrying clearly over the chaos. "This is official, territorial business." Hendricks spun around, his face contorting with rage as he saw Jed stride down the center aisle. "Stone! What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, Hendricks, is justice." Jed's gray eyes never left Emma's face as he approached the altar. She was staring at him with a mixture of hope and terror, as if she couldn't quite believe he was really there. Governor Crawford rose from his seat, his authoritative voice cutting through the confusion. "What's going on here? Who are you, sir?" "Captain Jedediah Stone, formerly of the Texas Rangers," Jed replied, never taking his eyes off Hendricks. "Governor, I have evidence of massive criminal conspiracy involving cattle rustling, murder, bribery, and corruption of local law enforcement." "This is preposterous," Hendricks sputtered. "Governor, this man is obviously deranged. He's been stalking my fiancé for days." "Your fiancé?" Jed's voice was deadly quiet. "Is that what you call a woman you're forcing into marriage through threats and blackmail?" Emma found her voice at last. "Governor Crawford, everything Captain Stone says is true. Malcolm Hendricks has been systematically destroying small ranchers throughout this territory. I have proof." She turned toward Maria, who stepped forward on trembling legs and handed over the leather-bound ledger. "This contains records of every crime, every bribe, every murder ordered by Malcolm Hendricks." The governor took the ledger with serious attention, flipping through pages that documented years of criminal activity. His face grew grimmer with each revelation. "Sheriff Hawkins," he said sharply, "arrest this man." But Hawkins remained frozen in place, his face pale with the knowledge that his own crimes were documented in that ledger. The sheriff's hesitation was all the confirmation the governor needed. "I see," Crawford said coldly. "Then I'll have to rely on other authorities." He turned to Jed. "Captain Stone, will you take Malcolm Hendricks into custody?" "With pleasure, Governor." But Hendricks wasn't finished. With desperate speed, he lunged toward Emma, grabbing her around the waist and pressing a derringer to her temple. "Stay back," he snarled, his cultured facade finally cracking to reveal the monster beneath. "All of you, stay back, or she dies." The church erupted in screams as guests scrambled for cover. Jed froze, his hand hovering over his gun, knowing that one wrong move could cost Emma her life. "Let her go, Hendricks," he said quietly. "It's over. You can't escape this." "Can't I?" Hendricks backed toward a side door, dragging Emma with him. "My horse is waiting outside. The lady and I are going to take a little ride, and if anyone follows us, she'll pay the price." Emma's green eyes met Jed's across the chaos, and he saw her mouth a single word. Trust. Before anyone could react, Emma suddenly went limp in Hendricks' arms, her full weight dragging him off balance. In that split second of confusion, she twisted away from the gun and drove her elbow hard into his solar plexus. Hendricks doubled over with a grunt of pain, and Jed moved like lightning. His fist connected with the cattle baron's jaw with a satisfying crack, sending the man sprawling across the church floor. "It's over," Jed said, standing over the unconscious form of Malcolm Hendricks. "Finally over." Emma swayed on her feet, the adrenaline draining from her system. Without thinking, Jed caught her in his arms, holding her close as she trembled with reaction. "I'm sorry," he whispered against her hair. "I'm so sorry I didn't understand. I should have known you would never." "You came back," Emma interrupted, her voice muffled against his chest. "That's all that matters. You came back for me." Around them, the church buzzed with activity as Governor Crawford took charge, ordering the arrest of Sheriff Hawkins and the securing of evidence. But for Jed and Emma, the world had narrowed to just the two of them, holding each other as if they'd never let go. "I love you," Jed said simply, the words he'd been afraid to speak finally breaking free. "I love you, and I'll never doubt you again." Emma pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "I love you too. I've loved you since that night in the cabin when you trusted me enough to share your pain. Their lips met in a kiss that spoke of second chances and new beginnings, of love strong enough to overcome any obstacle. The nightmare was over, and their future, whatever it might hold, stretched out before them like a promise. In the chaos of arrests and explanations that followed, few people noticed the two figures standing quietly in the corner of the church, lost in each other's eyes. But old Pete saw, and his weathered face creased in a smile of pure satisfaction. Love had won, as he'd always known it would. The rest was just details. Chapter 8. Beneath the Texas Sky. Emma pulled Thunder's lead rope gently as they walked through the same hidden canyon where her nightmare had begun 2 weeks ago. The magnificent black stallion snorted softly, his ears pricked forward as he recognized the familiar terrain. Behind them, her other 4 horses followed peacefully, finally free to return to their rightful home. "Easy, boy," she murmured, running her hand along Thunder's glossy neck. "We're safe now. All of us." Jed rode beside her on his bay gelding, his eyes constantly scanning the canyon walls despite knowing that the danger had passed. Malcolm Hendricks was locked in the territorial prison awaiting trial. Sheriff Hawkins had been stripped of his badge and arrested, and the Blackwood gang was scattered to the winds. "Hard to believe it's really over," Jed said, echoing her own thoughts. Emma nodded, still marveling at how quickly their fortunes had changed. Governor Crawford had been thorough in his investigation, using Hendricks' ledger to uncover a web of corruption that reached into 3 counties. Property stolen through fraud and intimidation was being returned to its rightful owners, and honest lawmen were being appointed to replace Hendricks' paid lackeys. "The governor said the bank will return your father's note tomorrow," Jed said, watching her face carefully, "along with compensation for the illegal seizure of your property." "Enough to not only save the ranch, but to expand it," Emma replied, still hardly believing the reversal of fortune. Father's dream of building the finest horse breeding operation in Texas might actually come true. They rode in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, testimony, and the slow process of rebuilding lives shattered by Hendricks' greed. Through it all, Emma and Jed had grown closer, their love deepening with each shared challenge and victory. As they crested the ridge that overlooked Emma's ranch, she reined in Thunder and stared down at the familiar buildings with tears in her eyes. Home. After everything she'd endured, she was finally home. Old Pete emerged from the barn as they approached, his weathered face breaking into a grin when he saw the returning horses. "Dios mío," he exclaimed, hurrying toward them. "Thunder, you beautiful devil, I thought I might never see you again." The stallion whickered a greeting, clearly remembering the man who'd helped raise him from a colt. Pete's hands moved expertly over the horse's legs and body, checking for any signs of mistreatment during his captivity. "They took good care of him," Emma said, dismounting to give the old man a fierce hug. Hendricks might have been evil, but he knew the value of good horseflesh. "See? And now they're home where they belong." Pete's eyes sparkled with tears he was too proud to shed. "Your papa? He would be so proud, Miss Emma. You saved not just the ranch, but the whole valley." Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion. She'd thought about her father constantly during the dark days of her captivity, drawing strength from his memory and his belief in doing what was right regardless of the cost. "We all saved it," she said firmly. "You, me, Captain Stone, Billy, everyone who found the courage to stand up to Hendricks." As if summoned by his name, Billy Santos emerged from the barn, his young face bright with the health and happiness that had replaced the hollow desperation of his outlaw days. Tom Bradley had taken the boy in, giving him honest work and a chance to build a better life. "Miss Emma," Billy called out, jogging toward them. "I've been helping Pete repair the corral fencing. We should have it finished by tomorrow." "Thank you, Billy, both of you." Emma's voice was warm with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without friends like you." Jed dismounted and began helping Pete and Billy unsaddle the horses, but Emma noticed his slight hesitation when it came to removing his own gear. The gesture was subtle, but she'd learned to read his moods over the past weeks. "Planning to ride out again soon?" she asked quietly. Jed's hand stilled on his saddle. Good pay, chance to make a real difference. Emma's heart sank, though she tried not to let it show. That sounds like a wonderful opportunity. It is. Jed turned to face her, his gray eyes serious. But it would mean traveling throughout the territory, being away for weeks at a time. I understand. Emma forced herself to smile. A man has to follow his calling. Jed stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head with something that might have been frustration. Emma, walk with me. There's something I need to say. They left Pete and Billy to tend the horses and walked toward the small creek that meandered through Emma's property. The setting sun painted the water gold and orange, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. This is where I used to come as a child when I needed to think, Emma said, settling onto a fallen log beside the water. Father would find me here whenever I was troubled about something. Jed sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. What did he tell you when you were troubled? That every problem has a solution, but sometimes you have to be brave enough to look beyond the obvious answers. Smart man. Jed picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water's surface. Emma, these past 2 weeks, getting to know you better, seeing how you handled everything Hendricks threw at you. He trailed off, seeming to struggle with his words. Emma waited patiently, sensing that whatever he needed to say was important. I've been a ranger for 7 years, he continued finally. Before that, I was planning to be a rancher like my father. I thought that dream died with my family, that I was meant to spend my life wandering from town to town, bringing justice to people I'd never see again. Maybe that was exactly what you were meant to do, Emma said softly. Maybe everything that happened to you led you here, to this moment, to save this valley from Hendricks. Jed turned to look at her, his expression intense. And maybe it led me to you. Emma's breath caught at the emotion in his voice. Jed, I love you, Emma. Not just the pretty woman who can track better than most men and handle horses like they're extensions of her own soul. I love the woman who sacrificed herself to save people she cared about, who risked everything to gather evidence against a monster, who never gave up hope, even when everything seemed lost. Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible. Then marry me. The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back for days. I know I don't have much to offer. No ranch, no settled home, just a man who spent too many years living with ghosts. But I promise you, Emma, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your love. Emma stared at him through her tears, her heart racing with joy and disbelief. Are you asking me to give up my ranch and follow you around the territory? Jed's face fell. If you can't, I understand. The ranch is your father's legacy, your dream. I have no right to ask you to abandon it. Oh, you stubborn man. Emma laughed through her tears, reaching out to cup his face with her hands. I'm not asking because I'm opposed to the idea. I'm asking because I want to understand what kind of life you're offering me. Hope flickered in Jed's eyes. What kind of life do you want? Emma was quiet for a moment, thinking about her father's dreams, her own ambitions, and the love that had grown between her and this complicated, honorable man. I want a life with you, she said finally. Whatever that looks like, if you want to accept the marshal's position, we'll find a way to make it work. If you want to help me build the horse breeding operation my father dreamed of, we'll do that together. The important thing is that we face whatever comes as partners. Jed's hands covered hers, his voice rough with emotion. Are you sure? Being married to a lawman isn't easy. There's danger, uncertainty, long separations. There's danger in ranching, too, Emma pointed out. Storms, droughts, rustlers, difficult animals. The difference is whether you face those challenges alone or with someone who loves you. Jed was quiet for a long moment, then reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in faded cloth. With careful hands, he unwrapped it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small but perfectly clear diamond. This was my grandmother's ring, he said softly. The only thing I saved from my family's ranch. I've carried it with me for 5 years, never thinking I'd have reason to use it. Emma's heart melted as she looked at the delicate ring. It wasn't elaborate or expensive, but it represented something precious. Family, continuity, love that endured through generations. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jed slipped off the log and knelt beside the creek, taking her left hand in both of his. "Emma Rose Whitmore, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a reformed ranger who promises to love you with everything he has?" "Yes," Emma said, her voice strong and clear despite her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jedediah Stone." The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had been made for her, and Emma marveled at the way it caught the starlight. Above them, the vast Texas sky spread out in all its glory, the same sky under which they'd first kissed, first shared their pain, first dared to hope for something better. "I've been thinking about the marshal position," Jed said as he sat back down beside her. "Maybe it's time I stopped running from the past and started building a future." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe I should turn down the governor's offer and accept Sheriff Bradley's suggestion instead." Emma looked at him in surprise. Tom Bradley had mentioned to several people that Cedar Creek needed a new sheriff, someone honest and capable, who could help the community heal from Hendrick's reign of terror. "You'd want to stay here, permanently?" "I want to stay wherever you are," Jed said simply. "If that's here building the horse operation your father dreamed of, then that's where I belong. If you want to travel, see more of the world, then we'll do that together." Emma leaned against his shoulder, feeling a contentment she'd never experienced before. "I think Father would have liked you. He always said a good ranch needed both dreams and practical skills to make them come true." "What kind of dreams are we talking about?" Emma gestured toward the darkened pastures, where her horses grazed peacefully. "Breeding the finest horses in Texas, maybe shipping them back east to people who appreciate quality bloodlines, building something that will last for generations." "Sounds like a worthy dream." Jed's arm tightened around her. "Big enough for two people to share?" "Big enough for a family," Emma said softly, then blushed at her own boldness. Jed's breath caught. "Children?" "Someday, if we're blessed." Emma turned to look at him, seeing wonder and longing in his expression. "Is that something you want?" "I never dared hope for it," Jed admitted. "After losing my family, I convinced myself I wasn't meant for that kind of happiness. But with you? Yes, Emma, I want children with you. I want to build something lasting and good." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The same stars that had witnessed their first tentative attraction, their growing love, and now their promise of a future together. "When do you want to have the wedding?" Emma asked eventually. "Tomorrow," Jed suggested with a grin. Emma laughed. "I think the town has had enough drama for 1 month. Let's give everyone time to recover from the last wedding attempt." "Fair point. Next month, then?" "Next month sounds perfect." As the night deepened around them, Emma thought about all the changes the past weeks had brought. She'd nearly lost everything: her ranch, her horses, her freedom, even her life. But in the process, she'd found something infinitely more precious. A love strong enough to weather any storm. A partner who would stand beside her through whatever challenges lay ahead. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For coming back for me. For believing in me. For seeing past the surface to who I really am." Jed kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for not giving up. For fighting for what you believed in, even when it cost you everything. For showing me that some things are worth risking your heart for." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to another love story played out beneath the vast Texas sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new adventures. But tonight, Emma Whitmore and Jed Stone sat beside a quietly murmuring creek, planning their future and marveling at the unexpected turns that had brought them together. In the distance, thunder whinnied softly, as if adding his blessing to their union. Emma smiled, knowing that her father's spirit lived on in the horses he'd loved, the land he'd cherished, and the dreams he'd passed down to his daughter. The nightmare was over, the dream was just beginning. Epilogue. The happy ending. 6 months later, Emma adjusted the pearl buttons on her mother's ivory silk wedding dress as she gazed out the window of her childhood bedroom. Below in the yard, lanterns strung between the oak trees cast a warm glow over long tables laden with food, while fiddle music drifted up from the makeshift dance floor. Old Pete had constructed from salvaged barnwood. Half the county had come to celebrate her marriage to Sheriff Jed Stone, and Emma's heart swelled with gratitude for the community that had rallied around them in their darkest hour. Tom Bradley was testing the strength of Pete's handiwork by attempting an enthusiastic jig, while his wife laughed and clapped in encouragement. The widow Morrison sat at a corner table surrounded by children, regaling them with stories that made their eyes grow wide with wonder. Even Billy Santos was there, looking handsome and confident in his new role as deputy sheriff. The boy had found his calling in law enforcement, channeling his intimate knowledge of outlaw tactics into protecting the innocent. Jed had been reluctant to hire him at first, but Emma had convinced her husband. To be that everyone deserved a second chance. Is Emma? Maria's soft voice interrupted her reverie. The young woman had left Hendrick's employment after his arrest, and now worked as Emma's housekeeper, her dark eyes bright with the happiness that came from genuine freedom. It's time, Emma nodded, taking one last look at herself in the mirror. The dress had belonged to her mother, carefully preserved in lavender and hope through all the years since her death. The ivory silk had yellowed slightly with age, but Emma thought it perfect. A connection to the woman who'd given her life and the father who'd shaped her spirit. You look beautiful, mija, Maria said softly, fastening the delicate pearl necklace that had been Tomas Whitmore's wedding gift to his bride. Like an angel. Emma touched the pearls gently, feeling her parents' presence in the cool smoothness of the gems. They would have loved Jed, she knew. Her father would have appreciated his integrity and strength, while her mother would have seen the gentleness he tried so hard to hide. The sound of boots on the stairs announced old Pete's arrival. His weathered face creased in a smile as he offered his arm. Your chariot awaits, Senorita Emma, he said with exaggerated formality, though I think Sheriff Stone might combust if he has to wait much longer. Emma laughed, linking her arm through his. Pete had asked for the honor of giving her away, and she couldn't imagine anyone more fitting for the role. He'd been her father's closest friend, her own surrogate grandfather, and the man who'd risked everything to bring Jed back to save her. They walked down the familiar stairs and through the house that had been her sanctuary and her prison, her past and her future. As they stepped onto the front porch, Emma's breath caught at the sight before her. Every person who'd suffered under Malcolm Hendrick's tyranny was there, their faces glowing with joy in the lantern light. But it was the man standing beneath the oak tree where her parents had been married 30 years ago who made her heart race with anticipation. Jed wore a black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean build, his dark hair neatly combed for once, though Emma could already see rebellious strands beginning to escape. The silver star on his vest gleamed in the soft light, a symbol of the respect he'd earned from a community that had learned to trust again. But it was his eyes that held her captive as she walked toward him. Those steel-gray eyes that had once been so cold and guarded, now warm with love and wonder as they drank in the sight of her. Reverend Thompson, newly arrived from Austin to replace the corrupt minister who'd fled with Hendricks's other accomplices, stood waiting with his Bible open. The honest man of God had been recommended by Governor Crawford himself, and his kind face radiated the genuine faith that had been so lacking in their community. Dearly beloved, Reverend Thompson began as Emma took her place beside Jed, we are gathered here tonight under God's vast sky to witness the joining of two hearts that have weathered storms and emerged stronger for the testing. Emma barely heard the traditional words, too lost in Jed's steady gaze. His hand found hers, strong and calloused from years of hard living, but gentle as it cradled her fingers. The simple gold band that would soon join her grandmother's ring on her finger waited in his palm, warm from his touch. The rings? Reverend Thompson prompted gently. Jed's voice was steady despite the emotion Emma could see in his face. With this ring I thee wed. I promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you through whatever trials or joys the Lord sees fit to send us. You are my heart, Emma, and I am yours for all the days of my life." Emma's voice trembled only slightly as she placed the matching band on his finger. "With this ring I thee wed. I choose you, Jedediah Stone, not just for today, but for every day that follows. In prosperity and hardship, in sickness and health, in peace and danger, I will be your partner and your love. By the power vested in me by the territory of Texas and Almighty God," Reverend Thompson declared with satisfaction, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Sheriff Stone, you may kiss your bride." The cheer that went up from the assembled crowd rivaled the sound of Thunder's triumphant whinny as Jed's lips found Emma's in a kiss that spoke of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. When they finally broke apart, Emma saw tears in her new husband's eyes that matched her own. "Mrs. Stone?" he said softly, testing the sound of her new name. "I like the sound of that," Emma replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The celebration that followed was everything a frontier wedding should be: loud, joyous, and filled with the kind of simple pleasures that made life worth living. Mrs. Bradley had outdone herself with the feast, producing platters of fried chicken, fresh biscuits, and apple pie that disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared on the tables. Tom Bradley raised his glass of old Pete's carefully hoarded whiskey in a toast that brought tears to more than one set of eyes. "To Sheriff and Mrs. Stone, who showed us all that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust in love and fight for what's right. May your marriage be blessed with many years of happiness and enough excitement to keep things interesting." As the evening wore on and the dancing began in earnest, Emma found herself swept from partner to partner. Pete's courtly waltz, Tom Bradley's enthusiastic polka, even Billy Santos's carefully practiced two-step. But it was when Jed finally claimed her for their first dance as husband and wife that the evening reached its perfect moment. The fiddle player, an old cowboy named Sam, who'd ridden with Emma's father in younger days, struck up a slow, sweet melody that seemed to capture all the hope and promise of new beginnings. As Jed's arms encircled her and they swayed together beneath the stars, Emma felt the last of her fears and sorrows melt away. "Happy?" Jed asked, his voice warm against her ear. "Beyond words," Emma replied, leaning into his strength. "Though I have to admit, it feels almost too good to be true. I know what you mean. 6 months ago, I was a bitter drunk, convinced I'd never deserve happiness. Now look at me, married to the most amazing woman in Texas, with a job I love and a community that actually wants me around. Don't forget the horses," Emma added with a smile. "Thunder's been showing off for you all week, hoping you'll take him out for a ride." Jed chuckled, spinning her gently as the music swelled. "The stallion and I have an understanding now. He gets the best oats and the finest mares, and in return, he doesn't try to kill me when I saddle him." "A very practical arrangement," Emma agreed, "rather like our marriage." "Is that what this is, a practical arrangement?" Emma looked up into his face, seeing the teasing light in his eyes, but also the deeper question beneath. Even now, after everything they'd been through, Jed sometimes needed reassurance that he was truly loved for himself, not just for his protection or his usefulness. "No," she said softly, rising on her toes to brush her lips against his. "This is love, Jedstone. Pure, simple, complicated, impossible, wonderful love." The music ended, but they continued to hold each other as their guests began to drift toward home, calling out final congratulations and promises to visit soon. Pete disappeared into the house and returned with his fiddle, playing a soft lullaby that seemed to bless the night with its gentle melody. As the last lantern was extinguished and the final guest departed, Emma and Jed found themselves alone beneath the vast Texas sky that had witnessed so much of their courtship. In the distance, Emma's horses moved like shadows across the moonlit pasture, Thunder's distinctive silhouette standing guard over his small herd. "It's perfect," Emma whispered, leaning against her husband's chest as they watched the horses graze in peaceful contentment. "It's home," Jed replied, his arms tightening around her. "For the first time since I lost my family, I truly feel like I'm home." Emma turned in his embrace, studying the face that had become so dear to her. The hard lines around his eyes had softened over the past months, and the perpetual wariness that had once marked him was gone. In its place was the quiet confidence of a man who'd found his place in the world. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "The future," Jed said simply. "Our future. The ranch we'll build together, the children we might have someday, the legacy we'll leave behind." "Children," Emma repeated, warmth spreading through her at the thought. "How many children do you think we should have?" "As many as the good Lord sees fit to bless us with," Jed replied. "Boys who look like you, girls who have your courage and spirit." "And your integrity," Emma added, "your sense of justice." "Our children will be lucky to have you as their mother," Jed said seriously. "You'll teach them to be strong and kind, to fight for what's right, but never lose their compassion." Emma felt tears prick her eyes at the certainty in his voice. "We'll teach them together. About horses and justice, about love and sacrifice, about the importance of community and standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves." "Together," Jed agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of forever. As they finally made their way into the house that was now truly theirs, Emma paused at the threshold to look back at the land that had shaped her, tested her, and ultimately given her everything she'd ever dreamed of. The vast Texas sky stretched endlessly above them, studded with stars that seemed to wink their approval of the love story that had played out beneath their ancient light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a ranch to run, a community to protect, a marriage to nurture through all the joys and sorrows that lay ahead. But tonight, Emma Stone was complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. She'd found her partner, her equal, her other half. Together, they would face whatever storms the frontier might bring, knowing that their love was strong enough to weather anything. Beneath the vast Texas sky, a new chapter was beginning, not just for Emma and Jed, but for everyone whose life they'd touched. The nightmare of Malcolm Hendricks was over, but the dream of what they could build together was just beginning, and it would be magnificent. Blurb: beneath the Texas sky, a spirited horse trainer and a brooding Texas Ranger team up to track down a stolen herd, only to find themselves racing against time and their own forbidden feelings. When horse trainer Emma Rose Whitmore's prize breeding stock is stolen by the notorious Blackwood gang, she faces losing everything: her ranch, her father's legacy, and her last hope of financial survival. Desperate for justice in a town where the sheriff can't be trusted, Emma storms into the local saloon demanding help, only to clash with Captain Jed Stone, a steel-eyed Texas Ranger haunted by his own tragic past. Reluctantly partnering with the determined woman whose tracking skills rival his own, Jed finds himself drawn to Emma's fierce courage and unwavering spirit. But as they follow the dangerous trail across the Texas plains, their growing attraction is tested by secrets, betrayal, and a corrupt cattle baron who will stop at nothing to claim Emma's land. And Emma herself. When Emma is forced to make an impossible choice to save the man she's come to love, Jed believes she's chosen wealth over their future together. But in the wild frontier of 1870s Texas, love and justice often require the ultimate sacrifice, and some battles can only be won when two hearts beat as one. Set against the vast backdrop of post-Civil War Texas, beneath the Texas sky, is a sweeping tale of courage, redemption, and the kind of love that can weather any storm.